Welcome everyone to the program. My name is Mdu Ntuli, and today I am thrilled to be speaking to Imtiaz A, Cajee, who is the writer of the book, The Murder of Ahmed Timol, My Search for the Truth. So before we dive deeper into the conversation, let me just tell you a little bit about what this book is about and who Imtiaz A, Cajee is. So Ahmed Timol was an anti-apartheid activist, political leader, and worked with the South African Communist Party underground based in Roodepoort near Johannesburg. After he was arrested at a staged roadblock in Johannesburg by apartheid security branch policemen, he died 5 days later in October 1971, following torture and beatings. He was only 30 years old. Police claimed he leaped out of a window on an upper floor of the infamous John Vorster Square police building. In 1972, an inquest was concluded which determined his death as a suicide. The claim was widely disbelieved. His case and murder is just one of many anti-apartheid freedom fighters and leaders who were murdered through torture and said to have committed suicide. It has been 50 years since that brutal murder of Ahmed Timol by apartheid police security branch while in police custody. Almost 45 years since that first 1972 inquest. In 2017, a second inquest reopened the case of Ahmed Timol's death. This was after 11 years of relentless work and fight and persistent perseverance by Ahmed Timol's nephew, Imtiaz Cajee, to have his case reopened and the truth revealed about his murder. On 12 October 2017, Judge Billy Motley ruled that Ahmed Timol was indeed murdered by the policemen from the security branch who had interrogated him and tortured him. This journey is all, in truth, is documented in the book, The Murder of Ahmed Timol, My Search for the Truth, written by Imtiaz A, Cajee. So today, it is my honor, I am absolutely honored to be speaking to Imtiaz Cajee. So Imtiaz, welcome. Thank you for speaking to me.
Good afternoon, Mdu. It's only my pleasure.
I hope that this year has begun in a healthy and in a kind way for you.
Yes, no, most certainly, Mdu. And, we continue praying that this pandemic passes, and our condolences to the many families throughout the country who've lost their loved ones.
Yes. So on page, just to start our conversation properly, in the book on page 199, you mentioned that on the day of the ruling, Judge Motley remarked, and he said something very, very interesting. He said in his judgment, he said, it was through your persistent efforts that this historic seating of the inquest had taken place. He also said that your efforts should be emulated as an example of how citizens have to assert their rights. And I thought that was a very powerful thing to say on the day of that ruling. How did that feel like for you in that moment when that judgment was handed down after those 11 years of fighting for the truth to be revealed?
Yes, I was truly humbled, Mdu, by the compliments paid to me by Judge Billy Motley. But, the entire 20 days that lasted of the inquest, Mdu, every single day that I attended, I went back to process my maternal grandparents in 1972 sitting at an apartheid era inquest. And I would try and fathom in my mind that what is it that was going through them? Because they had just lost their eldest son in the most gruesome manner. And here they go to an apartheid era inquest where my uncle's name, his character, his personality is totally smeared and discredited. Magistrate de Villiers calls my grandmother a liar because she had testified that a day before my uncle's death, the security branch officer had told her that she had failed to give her son a hiding. And when she narrated this, Magistrate de Villiers branded her liar. So throughout the 20 days of the inquest, and especially on the final day, when Judge Polemotle made this profound verdict, I played back in my mind my maternal grandparents praying that wherever they were in the next life, that they were celebrating and they were smiling. That finally, a democratic South Africa had made a verdict that their beloved son did not commit suicide, but that he was brutally murdered in police detention.
Can you tell us about that journey in those 11 years to get that case to be reopened and for the truth to come out? And also tell us about the people who assisted you in those 11 years.
Mdu, you know, this is a journey of utmost perseverance and patience and tolerance. And one has to be totally committed, you know, to embark on such an initiative. Because, I mean, there are certain days, there are certain events that are completely out there simply to derail you. You know, to simply make you to lose trust, to lose confidence, and to simply throw the towel, throw in the towel so that, you know, you don't pursue this matter. But I remained totally committed. Going back to 1996, when my grandmother testified at the TRC hearings. At that particular day, I made a silent vow to myself that I was no longer just going to speak about my uncle, but I was going to do something about it constructively. And that obviously led to the publication of the first book. And like you correctly state, 11 years ago, I started on this call for the reopening of my uncle's inquest. And I'm totally honored and privileged that the Foundation for Human Rights, led by the TRC Commissioner, Yasmin Suka, assisted by the Legal Resources Center and by the Pro Bono Legal Department at Weber Wenzel, with Advocate Howard Vani, who had supported me in making this particular call, and more importantly, for representing me at the 2017 inquest.
Wow. So at the beginning of the book, you are quoted as saying, "I was 5 years old when my uncle, Ahmed Timol, was killed in police detention. I have never claimed to have known him. That opportunity was afforded to his siblings, his contemporaries, his comrades, and others. It is not for me to judge how they preserved his legacy. The views expressed here are my own and do not represent those of the family, and I take full responsibility for any inaccuracies. This is my story." So my question is, since you were 5, you didn't know him, what created this determination in you to tell his story and to prove that his death was a murder and not a suicide?
You see, I have very special memories spending time with my late Uncle Mdu. He would take me to the Roodepoort Social Club where I would watch him swim. He would drive around in Mrs. Desai's yellow Engly, at the same Engly in which he got detained at the police roadblock. I remember coming from Mpumalanga and Standerton, coming to my maternal grandparents' flat in the middle of the evening. I think that was a time that he was already detained, and these huge security police officers walking around the flat. But I think it was my relationship with my maternal grandmother and grandfather. My grandfather would take me to my uncle's grave, and I could have only been 6 or 7 years old. And I would recite verses from the Holy Quran at my uncle's grave, would come back to the flat, and Ma would ask me, "Did you pray for your uncle?" And I would say, "Yes, Ma, I prayed for my uncle." So I had a very special bond with both my grandfather and my grandmother. And then obviously at the age of 12, Uncle Ahmed's younger brother, Mohammed, goes into exile. So as a 12-year-old, I'm now trying to understand, but when we went for school holidays, Uncle Mohammed was always there. He's now left the country unannounced. Uncle Ahmed gets killed in police detention. So I start probing my grandmother. And then she shows me the newspaper cuttings that the family had kept. And as a 13, 14-year-old, I'm reading these newspaper cuttings. Remember, there's no internet, there's no Google, there's no search engines. So as a 13, 14-year-old, I must say that has been privileged. A roof over your head, 3 meals every day, the luxuries, school holidays, transport to go to school. Absolutely blessed with all the luxuries that anybody could ask for. But yet I was deeply, deeply troubled that I could not go on with the mischief that my colleagues were doing as the 14, 15-year-old. I was processing all the time. Why was my uncle killed? Why is my uncle gone into exile? Reading the newspaper cuttings, trying to understand the political developments in the country. We're talking early 80s, where the country is burning. Listening to Capital Radio 604 to news broadcasts, reading the newspapers to understand and to put into context and perspective of what's going on. And I yearned at the 14, 15-year-old to avenge my uncle's killing. And I can tell you that if that opportunity arose, I would have taken it without a flinch of an eye. And I would have killed without a flinch of an eye. Because I was upset, I was angry. And I had no avenue to embark on. Because you come from a small town in Mpumalanga called Standerton. There's no political growth. There's very little, hardly any political literature. Everybody's scared. I mean, we lived in a time where we must remind the youth of today that mentioning the name of Nelson Mandela would get you detained. A picture of him could not be seen. Reading political literature was banned. So all of this culminated to make me a very angry young man, very angry. And the more I read, and the more I spent time with my maternal grandmother, and I saw the pain that she had borne for so many decades, grieving and mourning in silence. It shaped me politically. And obviously once the unbanning of the ANC and the TRC, so forth, all these years of anger that I had, I converted it to something constructive, to say, no, I'm going to do something. So with no academic qualifications, research background, I started on this journey to say I'm going to do something on my late uncle. And seeing the pain that many, many others had suffered throughout the country only encouraged me to say that this is a worthy cause and I need to invest in this thing, because I did not get an opportunity during apartheid to contribute to the liberation of this country. And I want to play some sort of a role in a democratic South Africa to remember our fallen heroes and heroines.
Wow. So now I would like us to talk a bit more about your uncle, who he was and how he got involved in the struggle. So firstly, at the beginning of the book, you introduce us to the family. You introduce us to your grandparents. You introduce us to his siblings. So your uncle was the eldest of his siblings. And also we know that he was a teacher. Even when he lived in London, he was a teacher. Even when he came back to South Africa in 1970, he again became a teacher. So can you tell us, how did he become involved in the struggle? What got him involved in the struggle?
No, very interesting question, Mdu. So, as you correctly state, he was an educator. And from all accounts, when he taught at the Roodepoort Indian High School, Mdu, from 1964 to 1966, the 3 years that he had taught there, the students that I had interviewed all spoke about a remarkable individual. So he brought about something completely different, which the other teachers could not do so. He used the classroom as a way of political awakening for many, many of the students at that particular time. Because remember, it was taboo, it was dangerous in the 60s in an apartheid era public school, you know, to talk about the struggles and the pains and the suffering of the majority of people in this country. So as an educator in South Africa, he brought something unique to many, many of his students. So when he goes to London, once again, when he's teaching kids from the sub-Saharan continent, from India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Meg Pahad makes reference again to, the dedication and commitment that Uncle Ahmed had shown to his students. And this again is echoed by his girlfriend, Ruth Longoni, that he took special pride teaching these underprivileged kids. So apart from being an educator, Mdu, in the 60s, he was very close friends with Aziz and Issouf Pahad, with their own involvement in the political struggle. So Aziz and Issouf leave South Africa, they're going to exile into London. And I think Uncle Ahmed, witnessing the suffering of the majority of people in this country, goes abroad, performs his pilgrimage, spends a number of years in the United Kingdom. And I think it was there where, he made this decision that he wanted to do something constructively to fight against the racist apartheid regime. So in essence, to respond to your question, I think it's a suffering that he had witnessed, not just about the Indian community, but of the majority of African people in this country. And I think this harmed him tremendously. And I know, I think it's in the first book where Ruth talks about Uncle Ahmed narrating to her how it upset him that he could not go to an ordinary restaurant in South Africa. He was denied access to the restaurant because of the color of his skin. So, he would share these discussions with Ruth when he was in London. So without a doubt, it was the suffering of the majority of people in this country that triggered him to make a stand against the racist apartheid regime.
And then he came, in 1970, he returns to South Africa, knowing that it's dangerous. Why? Why could he have not continued his activism in London? Like there are many exiles who came back in the 90s when Nelson Mandela was free and South Africa was liberated. So he could have done that, but he chose to come back to South Africa in 1970. Why?
So we must not forget, Mdu, that when Uncle Ahmed is in the United Kingdom, the senior leadership of the Communist Party make a decision that Uncle Ahmed must accompany President Thabo Mbeki and Ann Nicholson to the Soviet Union for political training. Right? So when they return, obviously President Mbeki and Ann Nicholson remain in London. But Uncle Ahmed makes a decision to return to South Africa. And you're correct. He could have waited till 1990, continued fighting against the racist apartheid regime like many, many other exiles. But I think his level of commitment resulted in him making the decision that no, he wanted to come back. Now, obviously, he could tell his mother that obviously he was longing for her without telling her that, he came back to do very dangerous underground activities for the banned Communist Party. But we must remember that during this particular period, this is a period between 68, when the political leaders are imprisoned after Rivonia, and before 76, when we have the Soweto uprising. So a very, very dark period between 68 and 76, where the apartheid regime had felt that they had crushed all forms of opposition in this country. And here comes my uncle, and all of a sudden, the security branch are faced with pamphlets appearing throughout the country, where messages are being conveyed to the masses of the country that know that the African National Congress and the Communist Party are alive and well and kicking, so that the masses must not give up hope. They must have faith that the struggle is continuing. So it was in this particular context that he comes back. Very, very difficult, dark, dangerous times. And I think because of the level of his commitment to do, I think nothing was going to stop him, to embark on conducting underground work for the banned South African Communist Party at that time.
Mm. Well, as you mentioned, that he had received some kind of training from the Soviet Union. So in fact, you write in the book, at the end of page 99 to the beginning of page 100, you say, upon his return to England from the Soviet Union at the end of September 1969, Uncle Ahmed told Uncle Mohammed that he would be returning to South Africa. Again, Mohammed sensed danger, but did not express his concern to Uncle Ahmed, who admitted that if he remained in London, he would marry Ruth Longoni. He felt, however, that as the firstborn child, he had a responsibility to support his parents. Uncle Mohammed believed that Uncle Ahmed felt it was his calling to conduct underground activities for the banned SA Communist Party. Uncle Mohammed did not inquire further about the extent of his brother's political activities or what they might entail. Yeah, so I thought it was interesting. And so in 1970, he returns. And then the following year, in 1971, he's arrested, he's captured in this so-called roadblock, because now we know that he had been under surveillance. It wasn't just a random roadblock. He had been followed. The security branch police had been watching him. And then 5 days later, he dies. And as you've stated in the book, you were 5 years old so on the day of the funeral, you were 5 years old, and it was a massive funeral. What can you remember about the day of that funeral?
So Mdu, I recall my grandmother standing at the window of the flat in which they were living in Roodepoort. I can have an image of this massive crowd, standing outside the flat. And then my father reminds me that he carried me and put me on his shoulders as we marched to the cemetery. But to be very honest with you, I've got absolutely no recollection of that.
Yes, and so to move on, in chapter 8, you tell us about the interrogation, the methods that the police, the apartheid police, a security branch police used to get information out of freedom fighters. And there's a particular person that you mentioned that I would like to just very briefly speak about. There's a Hasim Juma that you mentioned in the book, who was a friend of your uncle's from when they were at a teacher's college. Hasim was also tortured. And in 1990, so when you interviewed him, he told you about a story that in 1990, he resigned as a teacher. He actually wrote a letter to F.W. de Klerk expressing why he wished to resign. And so he says something very interesting in his testimony. He says, on the morning of Tuesday, 26 October 1971, while Juma was under interrogation. So now you start, quote, he says, I heard a loud scream followed by a groaning sound and a thud. I knew then that was the voice of my friend. I instinctively knew that he was being viciously assaulted. Mr. President, it is my unshaken belief that Ahmed Timol did not commit suicide, but that he was murdered by the security police, he wrote. That was interesting. That was fascinating. Do you know the methods that were used by the security police on your uncle when they were interrogating him?
Look, Mdu, listening to former political detainees talking about the torture that they'd endured, it's a very, very painful and an emotional exercise. And I could only piece a picture together listening to the testimony of Hassan Juma, who obviously, unfortunately, passed on before the publication of the first book. I would listen and spend many, many hours with Mrs. Amina Desai. She was in the early 50s. And she would tell me that she was standing in front of this Afrikaner Boers for 12, 24 hours without offered an opportunity to go to the bathroom. We would hear the narration from Salim Iso, detained with Uncle Ahmed at a police roadblock, of the systematic torture that he had endured. And apart from the normal sleep deprivation, standing for hours on end and so forth, he narrates of how security branch officers would kick him on his thighs as he was standing. So obviously there was a art to this cruelty of torture that was inflicted, apart from the raw, blatant physical assaults, that were forced upon these detainees. So when you then put the picture together, only with people that were detained with Uncle Ahmed Mdu, you get a frightening picture, because the forensic pathologists have confirmed, two of them have confirmed, that Uncle Ahmed had 27 anti-mortem wounds on his body prior to him falling. An ankle that was fractured, a face that was badly beaten. And I have photographs of him lying in the mortuary. And because it is so sensitive, I've not put it in the public domain, but I've studied those photographs for years on end. And you just try and visualize, again, based on the testimony of others detained with him, as to what he was going through. And remember, he was the leader of the cell. And if you ask me, Mdu, I think what really angered the security police officers was Uncle Ahmed telling them blatantly that he was a member of the Communist Party. And you know how the Afrikaners, the Nationalist Party, hated communists. And here comes this Indian, writing in his opening statement that I'm a member of the Communist Party. So I can only imagine the anger that they had, and they felt that he was not making full disclosures during the interrogation. And that is why that particular period annually, from the 22nd of October to the 27th, the almost 4 days and 18 hours that it endured, is the most difficult period of my life annually for that particular period. Because all that I do is that I try and visualize for those 4 days and 18 hours as to what was he going through. What was he going through? What was he thinking? And based on police version of events, he did not disclose. He gave them an honest recollection of events. He could have very easily implicated others, who were not even involved in the underground work. But he took full responsibility, and he went out of his way to safeguard and to protect, all of those individuals around him. So a very, very difficult period. And I think this is what many other anti-apartheid activists have endured over the years, Mdu. And we've heard this in the Neil Ackett matter, where the likes of Reverend Frank Chikani going into great lengths that a man was the caller, how he was humiliated and brutally tortured by the apartheid regime is absolutely devastating.
Yes, wow. So as you are doing your research, now you have to put this book together, and you have to do this research, and you have to read these documents, and you have to look at these pictures over and over and over and over again in order to put this book together. What emotions were you feeling during your research and your studying?
Mdu, this is what I had done, in order for me to remain committed. Without a doubt, emotional, heartbreaking, lots of anger. I had used this journey to convert my anger into something constructive. Not only to continue with the anger and with the rage, because that would not help me. This particular journey is therapeutic because I am blessed that I am in a position to convert these years of anger and put it in a constructive form, and hopefully using it as an opportunity for us to build a truly democratic, non-racial, non-sexist South Africa, and to reach out to apartheid perpetrators to say, if you think you did not apply for amnesty at the TRC hearings in 1996, you will get away with it scot-free. I've used this journey to empower myself, to hopefully make me a better person.
Imtiaz, you are working on a new book. So could you please kindly tell us some details about this new book that you are working on?
No, most certainly, Mdu. Look, the book, The Murder of Ahmed Timol, My Search for the Truth, ends with João Rodrigues having his first court appearance on the 30th of July, 2018. So more than 3 years later, Rodrigues' criminal trial has not commenced. He's lodged a petition with the Supreme Court of Appeal to dismiss the application brought against him. And a lot has transpired in these 3 years so that we can put into context what really happened at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. How was it possible for the likes of Jeff Benzine to get amnesty for the cold-blooded killing of Ashley Creel? How was it possible for a number of security branch police officers to get amnesty for the killing of Stanza Popape? Mdu Stanza Popape was detained, taken to John Vorster Square police station. 2 or 3 days later, the security police fabricated a story that a Stanza Popape who was handcuffed and with leg irons had escaped when he was being transported to Vereeniging. And in essence, what they had done, Mdu, is that they had killed him. They say, no, it was just electric shocks. But we are convinced that they had killed him and they had thrown his body in the Roodepoort River riddled with crocodiles. And years later, they come to the TRC and say, we're making full disclosures, grant us amnesty. And we all know that they did not make full disclosures, and yet they were granted amnesty. So these are the questions that I'm attempting to deal with in the third book, to understand why has a democratic government, Mdu, since 2003, when a TRC had made recommendations for more than 300 cases to be investigated. My uncle was the first in 2017. Who was responsible for ensuring that the TRC cases were suppressed? These are the issues that I'm busy investigating on. And I think there's a very, very clear picture that is emerging. And the picture must emerge and it must be told. Because we are not apologetic to politicians. They had failed to preserve the legacy of our loved ones. They had failed to find truth and justice for the killing of our loved ones, which does not mean that we are not forgiving. Who do we forgive them to? Apartheid era perpetrators are not willing, not prepared to come forward to make full disclosures for the killing of our loved ones. What are we supposed to do? We are not apologetic for pursuing the likes of João Rodrigues, who is in his early 80s. We are not apologetic because he's not prepared to make a full disclosure. And if he's not prepared to make a full disclosure, he must face the full wrath of the law. It is as simple as that. And this is the feeling, Mdu, of many, many families that I have come across throughout the country. They want their cases reopened. They want those inquest verdicts reversed that state that their loved ones had committed suicide. They want it reversed to say that they were murdered. And that is why we will continue embarking on this journey. And individuals like yourself, Mdu, engaging on these matters are very, very important because you are contributing to keeping the legacy of our loved ones alive. And for that, we are eternally grateful.
So in the foreword of the book, Nkosinathi Biko, son of Steve Biko, so he wrote the foreword, and he says something very interesting at the beginning of the foreword. He says, evading accountability for the deaths of thousands of freedom fighters in South Africa and the frontline state was rampant under apartheid. A few years ago, the Steve Biko Foundation commissioned research to examine the category of apartheid victims who were tortured and subsequently killed while detained under state security laws. Bantu Stephen Biko was killed 5 years after the murder of Timol, is a member of this class and is listed as number 49. The names of victims that we have uncovered thus far are listed on a commemorative wall in the permanent exhibition at the Steve Biko Center in King Williamstown. Their names also appear on an external wall in the commemorative garden. So I had a chance to look at this list that he was referring to. And it's a long list. And only Ahmed Timol and his case is the only case that has been reopened after apartheid. Do you think that these cases will ever be reopened? What is happening? Has there been any improvements since the publication of this book and the verdict in 2017 by Judge Billy Motley?
Look, I think firstly, we must never forget that the only reason that the Ahmed Timol inquest was reopened was because of the sterling work that was done by our legal team. The Foundation for Human Rights, Legal Resources Center, and Weber Wenzel, led by Advocate Howard Varney. They had ensured that we get this particular inquest reversed. I think if you would just leave it to the NPA, I'm not sure what sort of outcome would have emerged. So there is a context to the reopening of my uncle's inquest. Now, also, I have to highlight this point, that as far as the NPA were concerned, all the security police officers responsible for my uncle's arrest, death, and detention had passed on. And it was only because of the media campaign that we had initiated that one particular evening I got an email telling me that I've seen on the news that they're reopening your uncle's inquest, but that it is stated that all the police officers have passed on. And I'd like to tell you that Joao Rodriguez, who was the last person standing in the room with your uncle, is living. And this is his physical address. And this is his website. And that information came from his daughter. So if his daughter, Tilana, did not contact me, we would have reopened the Ahmed Timol inquest and Joao Rodriguez would have sat in the comfort of his home, like he did in 1996 when my grandmother testified, not been held accountable for his actions. So the power of media resulted in his daughter contacting me. And only on that basis did Rodriguez appear in the 2017 inquest. It's absolutely frightening. So if we did not embark on this media campaign, Rodriguez would have never been found. So there's some background and history and context to the 2017 inquest. Obviously, recently, the Neil Agate inquest has just concluded. It was held virtually because of COVID. Currently, the Ernest Dipali matter is continuing. Sometime this year, the reopening of the death of Dr. Hussein Hafiji in Pietermaritzburg will be taking place. But even there, the Neil Agate inquest and the call for its reopening was done in conjunction with my uncles in 2016. I was there when the late Advocate George Bezos was part of our delegation, made an urgent plea to the then National Director of Public Prosecution, Sean Abrams, to reopen the Ahmed Timol and the Neil Agate inquest. My uncle's inquest gets opened in 2017. The Agate inquest gets only opened in 2020. And by the time it gets open, the lead interrogator of Dr. Neil Agate, Stephen Whitehead, passes on. It is not ironical that the day the NPA and the Minister of Justice announced the reopening of the Neil Agate inquest, a day before Stephen Whitehead passes on. It's too much of a coincidence. So yes, there's a number of inquests that have been reopened, but I think we need to have a real look at the TRC. Not just on the killings of our loved ones, but the issue of media, the issue of the economy. These were critical issues that were not extensively dealt with the TRC. So many of us get a sense that there was a TRC hearing. Our loved ones went, relived the horrors of losing their sons and their daughters. And then the government came out with a report that was handed over and concluded in 2003 with a whole lot of recommendations about reparations, about memory projects to remember our loved ones, about financial compensation, about charging those who had not applied for amnesty. And then the entire matter just has a slow, painful death. So there's a lot of questions that needs to be addressed and focused. And the reality is that, yes, we've got many challenges in a democratic South Africa, from housing to education to the economy to school. I mean, it is endless. But we cannot justify relegating TRC matters and simply putting them off and being told that, no, you're bringing up issues that are long and that are over. They are not over. And this is why these matters continue resurfacing, and you'll find incidents of racial intoleration throughout the country, because the painful reality is that the oppressors of the majority of people have not taken responsibility for their actions. How many National Party politicians will come forward and tell you that we benefited during their party? How many sportsmen and sportswomen will come and tell us that they were privileged during the apartheid era? And we supported a regime that was illegitimate. They don't take responsibility. And they are very comfortable and convenient to see infighting within political parties, within the African National Congress. But bring out issues about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Mdu. You will see the change in complexion of their skin, because it brings back painful memories, and it brings back years and decades of oppression that they were responsible for inflicting on the majority of people in this country. And they want to take absolutely no responsibility, don't want to make any disclosures, and expect us to forgive and forget. This is something that will never happen.
I just love the way you concluded the book. So you say, this is the very, very last paragraph. You say, as for me, the day Allah calls me to return to Him, I will do so without any qualms, not a day earlier or later. Only as He prescribes will I reunite with my beloved uncle. A luta continua, the struggle continues. And it does. Imtiaz, thank you. Thank you for speaking to me.
No, it's only my pleasure, Mdu. It's a very difficult and a painful subject. And I always reiterate that my uncle was only one individual that we are talking about. There are families throughout the country. Nokutula Similani, Stanza Bopape, Boyki Hlapi in the Northwest. Their families are looking for remains, Mdu. How do you expect their families to continue living in a democratic South Africa when there's no attempt being made to find the remains of their loved ones? And I have witnessed families for decades not talking about their loved ones, because that is how they've managed their pain and their grief, in silence. And my journey has empowered them, has given them a glimmer of hope that if Imtiaz could succeed with his uncle, then surely something can happen about our father or mother or our sisters or brothers. And that is why I've embarked on this journey. And many times I've been asked, do I have a death wish? And I'm very, very clear that if I was afraid of dying, then I would not pursue this journey. I would not pursue this journey, because this is a journey of confronting our past. And unfortunately, we live in a democratic South Africa, Mdu, where there's new alliances that have formed, where comrades and apartheid era perpetrators bond together, and they have business interests looking after their own interests. So we have unique challenges. And when you bring about these matters, it becomes very, very uncomfortable to people from both sides of the political divide. And they will tell you, no, it's too painful. But selectively, you want to have a recollection of the dark days of apartheid when it's comfortable and convenient for you. But when you are pushed to say you're sitting in the corridors of political power, what are you doing to find the remains? What are you doing to fight for those families to reverse the inquest findings? What are you doing to contribute to the memory and legacy of your own comrades that were killed in the trenches with you? There's a deafening silence. And that is why Mdu, this message must continue. And it is never a message of hatred.
The Murder of Ahmed Timol, My Search for the Truth, by Imtiaz A. Cajee. Thank you very much.
Once again, many thanks, Mdu. It's only been a pleasure to have chatted with you this afternoon.